October 31st, 2017, began like any other Halloween night in Jacksonville, Florida. Children dressed in costumes walked the sidewalks in search of candy, neighbors decorated their homes with jack-o'-lanterns, and families enjoyed the festivities that define this spooky holiday. But inside a modest second-story condominium, hidden from the laughter and celebration outside, a different kind of horror was unfolding, a real one. It was not the kind conjured by ghosts or costumes, but one that emerged from years of abuse, fear, and control. That night, 30-year-old Ashlee Rucker and her sister, 28-year-old Lisa Rucker, became victims of a calculated act of violence that would forever alter the course of their lives. At the center of this devastation was Chad Absher, Ashlee's estranged boyfriend and longtime abuser. Their relationship was defined by cycles of intimidation, physical violence, and emotional manipulation. What began as a romantic connection had slowly, over the years, descended into something far darker. Friends and family had long worried for Ashlee's safety. She had suffered numerous injuries, some visible, others hidden behind forced smiles and anxious glances. There were bruises, broken phones, threatening text messages, and even disturbing social media posts where Absher had flaunted his abuse, photographing Ashlee's battered face and sharing it online as a perverse form of dominance. Still, like many survivors of domestic violence, Ashlee struggled to fully break free. The psychological chains of abuse are not easy to sever. Absher's control over her life had been extensive, but in the months leading up to October 31st, Ashlee had made important steps toward reclaiming her autonomy. She had moved into a new condo, sought support from family, especially Lisa, her fiercely loyal sister, and tried to focus on raising her child. She wanted a fresh start. But that independence, as is often the case in abusive relationships, became the very trigger that drove Chad Absher to a final, irreversible act. That evening, inside the condo she hoped would be a place of peace, Ashlee was not alone. Lisa was visiting a frequent occurrence. The two sisters had always shared a deep, protective bond. Lisa had watched her older sister suffer for too long, and she was determined to stand by her as Ashlee tried to rebuild. Also present in the home were children, one of them Ashlee's, making the scene not just a home, but a sanctuary. But that fragile sense of security was shattered the moment Chad Absher showed up. It's not entirely clear how Absher entered the property. Questions would later be raised in court about building security and whether the condo complex had taken necessary precautions, given Ashlee's known history with her abuser. But what's undeniable is that Absher came armed with a 9mm rifle, and he came with rage. His presence immediately transformed the atmosphere. Gone were the light-hearted sounds of Halloween. Inside those walls, tension filled the air like a storm cloud. The confrontation began almost immediately. Absher was agitated, irrational, and threatening. He began arguing with Ashlee, perhaps accusing her of betrayal or trying to leave him permanently. Such arguments were sadly familiar to her, but this time it was different. This time he had a weapon. Lisa, sensing that things were spiraling out of control, stepped in. She stood between her sister and Absher, placing herself in danger without hesitation. Her protective instinct was stronger than her fear. She had no idea that within seconds, her life would hang in the balance. Absher raised the rifle and, without warning, shot Lisa in the face. The bullet tore through her jaw, leaving her critically wounded and in excruciating pain. She collapsed to the floor but remained conscious, aware of what was happening, aware that the man who had just shot her was not finished. Ashlee screamed. Her child may have screamed too. Chaos broke out. Despite the pain and trauma, Lisa would later recount seeing Chad then turn his attention to Ashlee, who was either fleeing or trying to reach her injured sister. As Ashlee turned, attempting to put distance between herself and her attacker, Absher pulled the trigger again. The bullet struck the back of her head from several feet away. It was a clean shot, cold, calculated, and final. Ashlee dropped to the floor. There would be no saving her. For a brief moment, silence likely filled the space. Lisa, struggling to remain conscious, lay bleeding on the floor beside her dying sister. Somewhere in the room, A child stood frozen, eyes wide with horror, having just witnessed the murder of their mother and the attempted murder of their aunt. Absher didn't stay long. He fled the scene, vanishing into the night and triggering a full-scale manhunt. The Jacksonville Sheriff's Office issued warnings to the public, urging them to avoid the suspect and contact authorities with any sightings. Police patrols increased, helicopters scoured the area, and Absher's mugshot appeared across local news broadcasts. Back inside the condo, emergency responders arrived. Lisa, despite her life-threatening injuries, was able to speak. Her first words to the paramedics were direct and damning. "Chad shot me. Chad shot Ashlee." Those words would become a cornerstone of the prosecution's case. Paramedics rushed Lisa to the hospital, where she underwent emergency surgery. Miraculously, she survived. Her physical wounds would take months to heal, but the emotional and psychological scars were far deeper. She had not only been shot in the face, but had also witnessed her sister's murder at the hands of a man they had both feared for years. For the child who witnessed the attack, the trauma was immeasurable. The court later heard testimony from child psychologists who explained the likely lifelong impact of such an experience. Nightmares, PTSD, abandonment issues, and survivor's guilt, all of it began that night in that small second-story condo. The public response was swift. Vigils were held. Ashlee's friends posted tributes online, sharing memories of her kindness, her humor, her strength. Lisa became a symbol of resilience, fighting through her injuries to tell the world exactly what had happened, refusing to let her sister's memory be silenced. And as for Chad Absher, he was eventually apprehended and charged with first-degree murder and attempted first-degree murder. His trial would come years later, but the facts of that night remained undeniable. He had walked into that condo with a weapon, intent on asserting control the only way he knew how, through fear, violence, and destruction. As dawn broke over Jacksonville on November 1st, 2017, the light revealed the remnants of a nightmare that had unfolded just hours earlier inside a seemingly ordinary second-story condo. News spread quickly across Florida and beyond. Ashlee Rucker, a 30-year-old mother, had been shot and killed by her abusive ex-boyfriend, Chad Absher. Her sister, Lisa Rucker, had survived a gunshot wound to the face. Most shocking of all, the sister's children had witnessed the horrific crime. In an instant, what had been a haven became a crime scene, and what had been a family was irreparably broken. The immediate aftermath of the shooting was chaotic and heartbreaking. Police quickly cordoned off the scene, securing the area and gathering evidence. Inside the condo, investigators found blood spattered across the floor and walls, bullet casings, and signs of a struggle. The forensic team worked meticulously to reconstruct the sequence of events, aided by Lisa's testimony and the layout of the home. Outside, news vans began to arrive, and neighbors stood in stunned silence. Many had no idea that something so horrific could happen right next door. Lisa Rucker was rushed to the hospital, where doctors worked frantically to save her life. The bullet had shattered her jaw and damaged her facial nerves, requiring extensive surgery. Yet, even in that critical condition, Lisa was adamant about speaking to law enforcement. She identified Chad Absher as the shooter and described the events in vivid detail. Her bravery and clarity would become key elements in the criminal case against him. While Lisa recovered in a hospital bed, law enforcement launched a citywide manhunt. Chad Absher had fled the scene and was considered armed and dangerous. Police released his photo to the media and warned residents not to approach him. The manhunt lasted several hours, with officers searching abandoned buildings, nearby woods, and the broader Jacksonville area. Tips poured in from the public, and it was eventually through one of these leads that police tracked Absher down and arrested him. He was taken into custody without incident and charged with first-degree murder and attempted first-degree murder. In the weeks that followed, Jacksonville grieved. Vigils were held in Ashlee's honor. Friends and family gathered to share stories of her kindness, her sense of humor, and her deep love for her child. Photos of Ashlee flooded social media, accompanied by messages of support for Lisa and demands for justice. Domestic violence advocates use the tragedy to raise awareness, stressing the importance of protection orders, safety planning, and systemic reform. Lisa's recovery was long and painful. Physically, she underwent multiple surgeries to reconstruct her jaw and repair the nerve damage caused by the bullet. She had to relearn basic tasks like speaking and eating. Psychologically, the trauma was even more profound. Lisa had not only experienced a near-fatal injury, but had watched her sister die at the hands of a man they had both feared for years. Therapy and support from her family helped her cope, but the road to healing would stretch far into the future. The children who had witnessed the crime were placed in the care of relatives and underwent psychological counseling. The court took steps to protect their identities and shield them from public exposure, but their trauma was undeniable. Child psychologists testified that early intervention would be crucial to helping them recover from the psychological damage of witnessing such extreme violence. As Chad Absher awaited trial, his defense team began crafting their narrative. They claimed that the shooting had been a tragic accident, the result of a struggle over the weapon during a heated argument. They portrayed Absher as a man under stress, reacting poorly, but without premeditation. However, this version of events was contradicted by multiple pieces of evidence. Forensic analysis showed that the shot that killed Ashlee had been fired from at least 3 feet away, consistent with an execution-style killing, not an accident. Furthermore, Lisa's eyewitness account and the absence of any defensive wounds on Absher undermined the claim of a struggle. In 2022, nearly 5 years after the incident, the trial finally began. The courtroom was packed with reporters, supporters of the Rucker family, and domestic violence advocates. Lisa Rucker took the stand, her face partially reconstructed, but her voice unwavering. She recounted the events of that night in painful detail. Her testimony was powerful and emotionally charged, painting a vivid picture of the terror they endured. Prosecutors methodically presented the evidence: the blood spatter patterns, the bullet trajectories, the forensic reconstruction of the crime scene, and the medical examiner's report confirming that Ashlee had died almost instantly from a gunshot wound to the back of the head. They showed social media posts made by Absher that documented prior abuse. They presented text messages and witness statements that confirmed Absher's jealousy, possessiveness, and violent tendencies. The defense, in contrast, struggled to mount a convincing case. Their assertion that the shooting was accidental failed to explain the clear forensic evidence and the consistency of Lisa's account. Absher took the stand in his own defense, but his demeanor and conflicting statements did little to sway the jury. After just 80 minutes of deliberation, the jury returned with a unanimous verdict: guilty on all charges. Chad Absher was convicted of first-degree murder and attempted first-degree murder. He received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. For the Rucker family, the verdict brought a measure of justice, though it could never undo the loss they had suffered. In the aftermath of the trial, Lisa Rucker spoke publicly about the importance of believing survivors and addressing domestic violence before it escalates. She worked with local advocacy groups to share her story and push for legislative changes, including improved enforcement of restraining orders and better training for law enforcement in handling domestic abuse cases. The civil component of the case also moved forward. The Rucker family filed a lawsuit against the condo association and its security company, arguing that lax security had enabled Absher to access the property and commit the crime. They contended that prior warnings about Absher's threats had been ignored and that better security measures could have prevented the tragedy. That lawsuit brought attention to the responsibilities that landlords and property managers have when it comes to protecting tenants from known threats. Today, years later, the echoes of that night still linger. Lisa Rucker continues to live with the physical and emotional scars of the attack. The children involved are growing up with the support of extended family, slowly finding their footing in a world that changed overnight. And Ashlee's memory lives on, not just as a victim, but as a loving mother, a brave woman, and a symbol of the urgent need to address domestic violence with the seriousness it demands. The Rucker case serves as a devastating reminder of what can happen when abuse goes unchecked. But it also stands as a testament to resilience, to a sister who refused to let silence bury the truth, to a community that rallied for justice, and to the enduring belief that from even the darkest nights, some light can emerge.